Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Trails of Cold Steel Northern War, Season 1, Episode 5. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're picking up in the aftermath of last episode. Well, even more time has passed because the team is already going to Legram and have already left, and they're on their way to Berea, and they've kind of made no progress in learning anything about the hero. So once again, to be fair, like I've been thinking about this because I was like, I know the newspapers, at least the Imperial Chronicles, at least to my recollection. Once again, I'm not always the biggest on like the finer details, but I could swear they said his name is Reen Schwarzer, the Ashen Chevalier, but maybe they're tweaking. Maybe they did. Maybe they always just. I'm pretty sure they always said like Reen Schwarzer. So like the fact is, Lavi didn't know his name immediately. They just know him as like, oh, the Ashen Chevalier. And like that's how most people would know him. Because even later on, they're just like, oh my god, it's the Ashen Chevalier. Because that's all people know him as. And most people wouldn't I guess once again, it's like he's probably got one photo in the newspapers because once again he avoids interviews like crazy, so many people probably don't off the top of their head know who he is. All they know is the ash colored knight Valimar. So either way, it is. So I was just, also that depends on whether or not they've read any Imperial Chronicles, because there's a good chance they haven't read any, but because that news probably isn't like well known that in Northumbria, like it might not travel that far, like his name. It might be such a small detail that it means kind of nothing in Erebonia as much, but at least at this point, because once again, this is still early days in his fame. So his name doesn't precede just the Ashen Chevalier, so like most people wouldn't even just recognize his face at this point in time. Either way, what I thought was interesting that there was a noble on the train acting super pompous and stuff like that. You could tell everyone on the train was irritated. I was like, this seems like the worst time to be a pompous douchebag kind of a noble, especially considering the fact is the time frame. I'm like, yo, homie, like I'm being hyperbolic here, but yo, the civil war that took place between the nobles and like the Imperial Army, yo, that was only like 5 minutes. That ended like 5 minutes ago, homie. Why you wilding out and acting? I was like, well, I mean, we already know like there are plenty of pompous nobles who still were like still pompous even in a year after like everything went down in with the October War. But nevertheless, there ended up being this incident with the train, and Lavi ended up protecting the noble guy, but he turned out to be good in the end. I mean, yeah, he was letting his servants do the work while everyone else was doing the work, and he was chilling and relaxing until he saw the kid's hand, and they were kind of scuffed up. He's like, you know what? No, I've had people wait on me hand and foot, and I think that's also the thing, too. Like, you know, it's like, yeah, he comes off a little pompous, but also it's like, right, we know firsthand in the Erebonian arc that not every noble sucks. There are really good nobles, the ones you get to know, like a Eustace, a Reen, or a Laura, but then there's also just like the ones you know, obviously like at Thor's, and then just the ones that you don't get to really know, like not the really well-known ones like the ones at Thor's, but just like NPCs like you meet in towns and stuff. Like you learn that they're not all bad, and like him having a change of heart and wanting to help out, and even that line of, hey, there's no line between commoner and noble anymore. So, and I mean, I think it also plays into the later arc of like, yes, that's still a thing in 3 and 4, but after the events of the Civil War, after the October War, the nobility's power start waning anyway, so that became less of a like focal point of like, obviously the Erebonia arc in the back half with 3 and 4, but still. So I just thought that was kind of a nice, like almost heading in that trajectory of just like, right, he probably only thinks like that because of the aftermath of the Civil War, and he sees how hard the commoners are working, and it's like, oh, I'm not doing my part either. It's like, right, why am I getting so caught up in like there are no commoner and no nobility, which is interesting because I forgot like we actually had the beginning with Rufus talking to Aurelia and Wallace, and it's like that's Bardius, so. And obviously Rufus is talking about Glark, And it's like, oh yeah, like he's kind of a relic of a forgotten like era. But Aurelia, because Aurelia is Aurelia, she would never look down upon anyone, especially another warrior. We know that's who she is. And she was referencing like, right, just because, like, don't underestimate someone because it's like someone who's been on a battlefield, someone who's come out on the other side, who led a revolution in Northumbria in the aftermath of the Salt Pail incident. So it's like, don't underestimate them. And obviously you get a little peek into some of the stuff with Rufus, where he's kind of like, oh yeah, the line between nobility, like, get rid of nobility and commoners. And he's like, I'm basically hoping that you'll do your part to help us and stuff like that, which obviously we know where this is heading. But him also being like, yeah, we could always play our Empire's heroes as our trump card. And Aurelia's like, the Ashen Chevalier. And she said this interesting line where she's like, I hope he never knows a battlefield or something like that. Which I think, yes, Reen's been on battlefields and stuff like that, but I think for Aurelia, it's like, I hope he never has to be in a position, which obviously foreshadowing the complicated position he's in when it comes to Northumbria. But it's like, yeah, she's indirectly met him once. To be fair, like, him and the others were hiding behind the door when they went to visit Legram in Code Steel 2. And then there's an interesting line from Bardius where he was like, right, the figurehead hero or the hero of the past who's lost his homeland, I wonder which one's more pathetic, you know? And it's like, that's a heartbreaking line because, yeah, both suck. Yeah, because, like, yes, all Reen is a figurehead, you know? And he understands that. It's just like, I'm meant to be the face, but, you know, so once again, that's why it continues to be, I've said it time and time again, why the title of Ashen Chevalier has been a noose around his neck. And the same thing, now, that line of like, oh, a hero of the past who's lost their home, like that could, I would assume that's more in correlation with Glark and stuff. But I also feel like, obviously, you can also make the interpretation of, like, that could be representative of Lloyd in the SSS, because, I mean, that also plays into 3, you know, Operation Birdcage and everything of, like, oh, yeah, like, these forgotten heroes, make them forgotten of, like, what they did and made, which obviously plays a role in not only 3, but also in Code Steel 4 as well. So, it's applicable in that regard, too. But I think it's just an interesting and like element of just like getting that side of things, especially because like 3 and 4 are like your biggest opportunities. Obviously, you spend even more time with Aurelia becoming principal and her being principal and everything. But even Wallace, like you get to know him a little bit more in 3 and 4. But like because obviously like you only see them twice in Code Steel 2, and you hear about their exploits in like the western side of Erebonia, like during the Civil War, but that's about it. So I think that's going to be an interesting bridge, especially because like for Reen, like obviously he interacted and knew exactly who Aurelia was, and because they hadn't seen each other by the time 3 started, they hadn't seen each other since like a couple months prior at the conclusion of the Northern War. So it's just interesting to kind of get that little like in between section there to kind of probably get a little more insight into Aurelia and especially like of her opinion and views on Reen and stuff. So, but speaking of Reen, when Lavi was saving that noble dude, she fell down the hole and ended up running into Reen and Altina, who were there because I think, didn't they say like, basically, the train incident happened because of monsters. Like, apparently, like, obviously, Eustace had put out something about, you know, helping out with that. But I wonder, is that why Reen took that job? Is it just the government told him to do it? Or did he kind of jump at it because it's like, oh, Eustace, like, he had even more reason to do it because it's like, oh, I'm taking care of a monster, I'm helping people, but I'm also like, someone needs to do this also because there's no bracers in Erebonia. Well, very limited bracers in Erebonia. But I was also wondering, could it just be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do a solid for Eustace. Like this is one of my close friends. Like I'll help him out, type of thing, you know. Or maybe it's just serendipity that kind of allowed that. But either way, Reen and Lavi running into each other. Like I said, when he introduced himself, and that sad moment of him not being able to introduce himself as, oh, like it doesn't come up, but it just reminded me of his interaction with Lloyd and Ricio, where it's like, who are you? He's like, I'm reading shores are classic, and he has to stop himself. And I guess it's just like he's probably said it enough now that he doesn't stumble on it. That could have been an opportunity to do it again, but it's probably like a no. He's used to kind of referring to himself as being a part of the military now, so. And I do think it's interesting that he didn't like question Lobby too much, at least what we got in the episode. It's like, because obviously Reen's got sharp senses and can pretty much tell when someone's not just a regular person. And it makes sense later on he'd recognize like, oh, she's got like her skills. He's run into enough Jaegers, whether it be Nidhogg, a few of the other like dropout Jaegers they met along the way, as well as like he's crossed paths with the Northern Jaegers. Plus he knows someone from the Northern Jaegers. Plus he also knows, well, obviously that being Sarah, but also like he also knows Fee, who's a little younger than Lavi, but is very similar in the same regard. Except obviously in Fee's case she's a former Jaeger, but still. So for him, it's like because of his connection in that regard and just his natural senses, he was able to kind of pick up like okay, but like probably his experiences even more so led him to be like, yeah, she has to be like a Jaeger in disguise or whatever. So. It does seem, I'm curious like how much he actually does know. Well, it seems like he doesn't know much because they ask Altina, like, how much do you, and she's like, sorry, I can't share that with you. And then Reen has this line where he's like, right, kind of smiles because it's like, right, you have your secrets. And he's not going to push it too much because it's like, right, I'm just going to do my job and that's all it is. I shouldn't push you, especially because he doesn't want to like try and like, right, I'm not going to force you to say more than you need to, Altina. It's like, right, I have to remember your position and stuff. Like, yeah, we're fighting together and we've got each other's backs, but I also have to recognize like, right, I'm in my position, you're in yours as well, so. But once again, them traveling together, like underneath the path, that underground waterway, which I almost wonder. I mean, who knows how? Like, I feel like they're probably still pretty far from Berea, but maybe they're close enough where those waterways would probably eventually connect to like the underground passages beneath Berea, the ones you go through in Code Steel 1 and 2. I would assume those connect in that regard too. But either way. But them traveling together and obviously like them fighting through all those monsters and stuff. And then at one point in time, also just showing you who Lavi is because she's so impatient that is like, yes, despite her skills, she is still young and like super, because like she's like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna blow it. But Reen had to be like, no, wait. I mean, it's also like he probably knows those waterways enough to know like, okay, like not to blow stuff up, but she's showing just like how impatient she can be, and that kind of plays later on in the episode too. But ends up helping her, giving her back that souvenir of hers. And speaking of, I love that obviously Tally wants to do everything he can to help out with everything, which even Marty's helping out too. And it's like, oh wow, Marty, you can be not selfish too, which Asaria's like, well, why don't we just walk the rest of the way? But Marty's like, no, we already paid for the 4 tickets. And for Tally, that was the disappointing thing. It's like, oh, that's, you're not doing it because he's like, oh, like you cannot do things for non-selfish reasons. But it's like, oh, I see, Marty, you're only helping out because we already spent the money on the tickets, and it's like, what's the point? We might as well get our money's worth and get the rest of the ride. So that's the only reason why you're helping, because I want this train to move again. So it makes it so that we didn't burn all that money on 4 tickets for nothing. So I poor Tally, every time he has high expectations, they immediately get dashed in that regard. But I also love that Lavi was hungry or whatever, and lo and behold, Reen's there fishing. It's like, yeah, got my fishing gear. I'm like, yeah. I was like, oh, it brings a tear into my eyes because I'm like, oh, Kenneth would be so proud of you right now. Some of those catches you caught. And also Lavi being the one to fish too, which I think is kind of interesting. Because I talk about it, I think I've referenced this before. I just think it's interesting. Like, obviously in like 4, one of the characters that can fish other than Reen and New Class 7, Fee's one of the characters. I want to say it's Fee, Machias, and Crow are the only other characters from Old Class 7 that can fish, to my recollection. Maybe Sarah too? I can't remember. Either way, like, so Lavi fishing kind of reminds me a little bit of, that, so. Once again, also like the running gag in the Trails universe of like every lead character being a fisher, whether it's Estelle, whether it's Lloyd, Reen, Lavi. I can only assume like the main lead of Kurono Kiseki, the Calvert arc, he's got to be a Fisher too. Like he has to be. Either way, putting all that aside, they were finding their way out, but then Reen stopped because him and Altina needed to take care of the monster. Because for one, it's his job, but he also says like, right, I want to protect people. But for Lavi, it's like protecting people kind of like she kind of saying like, why would you kind of go out of your way to do that? It's kind of stupid. I think for her, it's like, like her opinion on that's a little different based on like, right, in Northumbria, it's one thing, but also it's just kind of like, she's not the very like, heroing type and stuff like that. She kind of leaves that to everyone else. It's just for her, I think it's just, hey, I'm doing my job. That's all it is. And Reen's kind of in that same position too. But he says like, right, I know you have something you must be fighting for too. And he's like, basically keep moving forward and don't, what was it? Basically, don't do it for the past, for it relentlessly. Essentially, like that, that being the title of the final, the finale of Code Seal 2, and also Crow's final words. Even Crow being in like Crow's death in his eyes, but he's like, yeah, I'm just quoting a friend of mine or something like that. Obviously, specifically, you can hear him say, quoting my senpai. I was like, which is, I mean, it's bittersweet, but it's also like, especially the complicated and turbulent situation you and Crow will eventually find yourselves in again soon enough. But Reen and Altina go handle the monster. And a lot of what was said kind of resonated with Lavi because she thought about, helping out people back in Northumbria. And also got her thinking about her grandfather. I think when she spoke to Reen, I like that they do have this episode together because the next time they meet will be as enemies. It's typically always like that with the people that Reen has a complicated circumstance with. It's like, yeah, your allies, you run into each other one moment and then you find yourself in another capacity later on. But luckily, both of them working together, they ended up killing the monster. For her, it's just like, yeah, I'm petty and I just want payback. It's kind of her justification. So they save the day, get back up there. Obviously, Lavi gets recognized as like, oh, here's the money. She has no interest in it. But it's like, no, we could buy a whole bunch of souvenirs with it. That's Asaria's point of view. Marty, I'm sure it's not thinking that. But then a whole bunch show up and it's like, yeah, of course our boy's going to do his thing and summons Valimar. And I'm like, yeah. Because obviously it's also interesting too because this is our first time getting to see it out. Because obviously in the games it just pops up. There's no like particle effect on it. It's hinted in the opening of 2 that's how the Tachi thing works. That basically when you summon your weapon, I mean obviously it's just, obviously in the game, like everyone's weapons just pop up out of nowhere, but specifically the Divine Knights, their weapons materialize. But the only instance you ever see that happening, like the particle effect around it, is in the opening animated opening of Code Steel 2 is the only instance you see of that, to my recollection. Either way, in one stroke, swing, ends up taking out all the monsters. But like I said, in that moment, like Reen kind of figured out who she was. But he's like, oh, they must be here undercover. So he probably picked it up the moment he spent more time with her. But he got to know her. So once again, like I was referencing earlier, being on the opposite ends of someone else. Just because it's like, right, she's here to protect her homeland. And he just not too long ago, because it definitely has already happened at this point in time, like crossed paths with someone trying to protect their homeland, that being Risha and Lloyd. So, but Lavi's so upset. She's like, right, I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna like just rip him out of that thing. It's like, well, for one, it's not gonna be that easy to take out Reen. Like, even outside of Valimar, you're not gonna take him down that easily. So there's that. But it burns her, like cuts her like to her core, hearing him get celebrated and stuff like that. It's like, right, I helped the man, and she's even seeing in her head like, oh, all the death and destruction he's going to cause in Northumbria, and it's like, that's the sad, once again, someone else had talked about that too, of like, yeah, Reen getting viewed as a monster, and it's so sad, because even Tali was like, oh yeah, like, look at this monster. It's like, you have no idea, and then once again, that's the sad thing of like, yeah, because even like Lloyd, like, because now Because it's like, Lloyd, I don't ever play the Cold Steel games by the time my first time through all 4 Cold Steel games. So when we met Lloyd, I didn't know his story and his struggles, but it's also kind of like the shoe was on the opposite foot, where it's like, right, Lloyd didn't know about Reen's struggles, but we did. And so the same thing in this regard, where Lavi doesn't know it. Like, you just see Reen one way, not knowing his circumstances. You just know, like, oh, he's a threat to our country, that he can come in. It's like, but yes, Reen would only do it, sadly, because he has to follow governmental orders, but it was the only way to, stop a war from, like, consuming his country, to try and stop so much death. He's not the best, but I think for Lavi, she's upset with herself, because it's like, right, he was right there. I could have killed him and then, like, stopped all of this coming. Like, our country would be okay. Like, Northumbria would be safe. But also, like, she kind of, like, got close to him and kind of felt like, oh, some camaraderie with him. And now it's like, oh, I was by my mortal enemy and I didn't even realize it. So it upsets her, and for her, it's like, right, I'll do whatever it takes to protect Northumbria. I think, like, even listening to his words and kind of taking them heart probably, like, bothers her a little bit too. But it's like, once again, it's just that shame of, that sad thing of just like, right, no, like, only those close to Reen know the truth about his circumstances. Everyone else, even obviously his future students, all have their own, with the exception now Tina. Everyone else had their preconceived notions, whether it be Kurt, Yuna, Ashen, and even Muse, all have their different motives and their own perspectives on him. And Altina's one of the few who knew, as well as the rest of, like, old Class 7, and those who are just close to Reen, who know who he really is, the true aspects of his character. So, and it's also nice to be able to see him kind of, like, a little laid back, considering, like, right, the circumstances he's in. Like, it's like, oh yeah, this is Altina, and this is Kalmasaleus. It's like, right, let's not spend too much time on her, like, freaking out, like, okay, what is this puppet thing? And probably maybe that's a little indicative of it too. The fact is, it's like, cool, she saw Kalmasaleus and she didn't freak out. Yeah, not a normal, regular person, because you don't see that every day, so. Which is ironic and interesting too, considering, like, right, the Northern Jaegers, as we know, had their connections to Ouroboros and the Archaisms, which obviously not a direct correlation with Arigatlam and Kalmasaleus, but still. Obviously, there's still, like, obviously the Ouroboros connection in that regard with the Black Workshop, but regardless. So that's interesting that they met like that. So once again, next time they meet, they'll be on opposite sides of things. And I'm curious to see, will Lavi kind of have the... I mean, we also don't know if she makes it out of this series. You hope so and you think so, but we don't know for sure. But I think it would be so interesting to see her perspective on things. Like, it probably won't be until the very, very end when she kind of finds out that maybe Reen isn't the monster she thinks he is. Which I'm sure, like, him using his ogre powers and, well, because he protects a lot of citizens when he does that. So maybe that might change Lavi's perspective on him, especially considering, like, oh yeah, because I also forgot, like, Rufus did bring up the BS reason why the whole, like, Northern War happened, because it's like, oh yeah, reparations for what the Northern Jaegers did, specifically to Celtic and their part to play in the war under Duke Alberea. But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.